Welcome to Lecture 4, Instruments for Conducting Foreign Policy 2. Introduction. In the last lecture, we started examining instruments of foreign policy. We discussed the techniques of diplomacy and also examined economic instruments. In this lecture, we would examine psychological and military instruments of foreign policy. Diplomacy, consular protection and assistance, security, defense and intelligence, economy and business promotion, development cooperation, cultural and educational scientific action. Objectives. At the end of the lecture, you should be able to explain what psychological instruments are, describe military instruments of foreign policy. Propaganda. One major type of psychological instrument is propaganda. I'm sure that you are used to hearing about the word propaganda. Most of the time, the concept is used in a negative sense too, as it often involves misleading publicity or information. Garth Jowett and Victoria O'Donnell define propaganda as a deliberate, systematic attempt to shape perceptions, manipulate cognitions, and direct behavior to achieve a response that furthers the desired intent of the propagandist. Also, Richard Alan Nelson defines it as a systematic form of purposeful persuasion that attempts to influence the emotions, attitudes, opinions, and actions of specified target audiences for ideological, political, or commercial purposes through the controlled transmission of one-sided messages, which may or may not be factual, via mass and direct media channels. In other words, propaganda can be defined as any message intended to modify the attitudes and behavior of people at which it is directed, primarily by appealing to their emotions. It is a policy tool deployed by all governments, usually through deliberate use of information, images, and ideas to affect public opinion. Propaganda is therefore the deliberate direction or even manipulation of information to secure a definite objective. It is an attempt to direct the thinking of the recipient without his conscious collaboration into predetermined channels. It is a conditioning of the recipient by devious methods with an ulterior motive. Propaganda emphasizes those facts which best serve its purpose. It creates the atmosphere in which the audience is most susceptible to suggestion. By power of suggestion, which in favorable circumstances becomes instruction, it secures positive action. Propaganda has at its disposal the mass media comprising of the radio, television, and even movies. These avenues make it possible to reach the individual in the privacy and the secrecy of his home. Types of propaganda. Information analysts often classify propaganda into three categories: black, gray, and white. Black or covert propaganda consists of outright falsehoods or material falsely attributed to a source. Black propaganda is subversive and provocative. It is usually designed to appear to have originated from a hostile source in order to cause that source embarrassment, to damage its prestige, to undermine its credibility, or to get it to take actions that it might not otherwise. Black propaganda is usually prepared by secret agent or an intelligence service because it would be damaging to the originating government if it were discovered. It routinely employs underground newspapers, forged documents, planted gossip or rumors, jokes, slogans, and visual symbols. 2. Grey propaganda. Grey propaganda is unattributed material of questionable validity. In other words, it is unattributed to the sponsor and conceals the real source of the propaganda. The objective of grey propaganda is to advance viewpoints that are in the interest of the originator but that would be more acceptable to target audiences than official statements. The reasoning is that propaganda materials from a foreign government or identified propaganda agency might convince few, but the same ideas presented by seemingly neutral outlets would be more persuasive. Information analysts often classify propaganda into three categories: black, gray, and white. Black or covert propaganda consists of outright falsehoods or material falsely attributed to a source. Black propaganda is subversive and provocative. It is usually designed to appear to have originated from a hostile source in order to cause that source embarrassment, to damage its prestige, to undermine its credibility, or to get it to take actions that it might not otherwise. Black propaganda is usually prepared by a secret agent or an intelligence service because it would be damaging to the originating government if it were discovered. It routinely employs underground newspapers, forged documents, planted gossip or rumors, jokes, slogans, and visual symbols. 2. Grey propaganda. Grey propaganda is unattributed material of questionable validity. In other words, it is unattributed to the sponsor and conceals the real source of the propaganda. The objective of grey propaganda is to advance viewpoints that are in the interest of the originator but that would be more acceptable to target audiences than official statements. The reasoning is that propaganda materials from a foreign government or identified propaganda agency might convince few, but the same ideas presented by seemingly neutral outlets would be more persuasive. Unattributed publications, such as articles in newspapers written by a disguised source, are staples of grey propaganda. Other tactics involve wide dissemination of ideas put forth by others, by foreign governments, by national and international media outlets, or by private groups, individuals, and institutions. Grey propaganda also includes material assistance provided to groups that put forth views deemed useful to the propagandist. White propaganda is the overt spreading of true information in the service of a cause. White propaganda is correctly attributed to the sponsor and the source is truthfully identified. The U.S. government's international broadcast service, Voice of America, for example, broadcasts white propaganda. From the above, we see that propaganda could be overt or covert. Overt propaganda describes conditions in which the propagandist's identity and interests are known to the target audience. In contrast, covert propaganda is in play when the propagandist is unknown or disguised, as in instances of unsigned political advertisements, clandestine radio stations using false names, or statements by officials who have been secretly bribed. So, testimony. This is the process of using authoritative views of respected or influential persons or authorities to justify or condemn an idea, person, or program in order to encourage the target audience to accept or reject. In other words, it is assumed that the respected persons or celebrity has endorsed the idea being sold to an audience. In fact, just a photograph of the person can generate more interest in that issue or cause thousands, sometimes millions of people to become supporters. For instance, respected former presidents, business tycoons, elder statesmen could be interviewed by the media on the particular issue at hand with the view of influencing the opinion of the person. Plain folk. This may involve associating an object, idea, person, or program with the values, norms, practices, and preferences of the masses or the common man. The structure of the propaganda organization, for example, identifying the leadership, organizational goals, and the form of media utilized, the target audience. Media utilization techniques, special techniques to maximize effect, which include establishing the credibility of the source, using opinion leaders, using face-to-face contact, drawing upon group norms, using rewards and punishment, employing visual symbols of power, language usage, music usage and arousing emotions, audience reaction to various techniques, counter-propaganda if present, effects and evaluation. In essence, propaganda experts employ a range of symbols, ideas and activities to influence the thoughts, attitudes and opinions and actions of various audiences, including such contrasting modes of communication and human interaction as educational and cultural exchanges, including public diplomacy, books and scholarly publications. The adoption of slogans and buzzwords, monuments and museums, spectacles and media events, press releases, speeches, policy initiatives, and person-to-person contact. It involves trying to influence people's views, feelings, and emotion about an object through the manipulation of information. Most often, the information that is given out to the public in order to achieve such an objective are false or may be half true. Military instruments. States employ their military principally in times of crisis to defend their interests, be they territorial, resources, or citizens, or in support of foreign policy aims such as acquiring new territory, gaining access to strategic resources, or upholding international principle. The military in the hands of an expert can be a much more diversified foreign policy instrument than is immediately apparent. For instance, it can mark the strength of a state's commitment to a security alliance through the presence of permanent military bases or the sending of a naval fleet to a region in dispute. Equally, public displays of technological prowess, such as the launching of ballistic missiles or the testing of nuclear weapons, can be important signals to potential adversaries and friends alike. With modern military technology outside of the reach of most states, global force projection is increasingly limited to merely a handful of states, with the United States as the foremost military power today. Until the end of the Cold War, the military was seen to be the most obvious measure of a state's power, but subsequently, many international relations scholars have argued that economic strength or even cultural reach are equally significant indicators. This gave impetus to proponents of soft power instruments, who argued that their approach was more suited to the changing international environment. In essence, military instruments involve the use of military means in the conduct of foreign policy. They are usually used in the attempt to get a target, a state, a group or groups within a state to change its objectionable behavior through either the threat to use force or the actual use of limited force, although generally associated with the coercive use of armed force, offensive, defensive, or deterrent. In a situation of war, conventional or unconventional, it also includes military threats, military intervention, military aid and assistance, sale of arms, and the use of military in peace support operations. There are three major forms of military instruments: military assistance, threat of coercion, and war. Military assistance is a very important instrument of foreign policy. It enables friends and allies deter and defend against aggression and contributes to sharing the common defense burden. Military assistance is a range of programs that enable friends and allies to acquire equipment, services, and training for legitimate self-defense and for participation in multinational security efforts such as coalition warfare. Military assistance promotes overseas presence and peacetime engagement by improving the defense capabilities of allies and friends while demonstrating the country's commitments to defend common interests. Sufficient military capability among allies reduces the possibility of the use of force should conflict situation arise. As an integral part of peacetime engagement, military assistance programs contribute to national security by enhancing deterrence, encouraging defense responsibility sharing among allies and friends, supporting readiness, and encouraging interoperability among potential coalition partners. It helps in reducing regional tensions and promoting regional stability. Some of the programs under military assistance include Foreign Military Sales (FMS), Foreign Military Financing (FMF), International Military Education and Training (IMET), and Voluntary Peacekeeping Operations (PKO). Foreign Military Sales. Foreign Military Sales Program is a government-to-government channel for selling defensive equipment, services and training. Responsible arms sales further national security and foreign policy objectives by preserving regional stability in areas important to a country's national interests through ensuring balance of military forces and reducing incentives to acquire weapons of mass destruction. National benefits derived from these sales include an improved balance of trade, sustainment of highly skilled jobs, and generation of revenue for the particular country. Foreign military financing. Foreign military financing helps in meeting a country's allies' security needs. The funding country provides funding for special programs that will help in enhancing the recipient country's internal security. International Military Education and Training. This is a low-cost grants program that provides professional military education and training to foreign military and civilian personnel, usually on an annual basis. For example, identified future leaders of foreign defense and non-defense establishments receive training in U.S. values, regard for human rights, democratic institutions, and a professional military under civilian control by attending IMET-sponsored courses and programs in the United States. The IMET program remains one of the least costly and most effective programs for maintaining U.S. influence and assisting countries in their transition to functioning democracies. Voluntary peacekeeping operations. Multilateral peacekeeping is an essential element of foreign policy strategy for promoting peace abroad. It allows countries to share its security responsibilities and burdens with others. The number of situations requiring peacekeeping operations has risen dramatically in the past few years and can be expected to increase further in the years ahead. Threat of coercion, also referred to as coercive diplomacy. Threat of coercion involves the use or threatened use of military force to achieve political objectives. It is a strategy that combines threat of force and, if necessary, the limited and selective use of force in discrete and controlled increments in a bargaining strategy that includes positive inducements. Nicholson also pointed out that where diplomacy provokes international animosity, it ceases to be diplomacy and becomes its opposite, namely war by other name. War can be described as armed conflicts between two or more governments or states. When such conflicts assume global magnitude, they are referred to as world wars. Examples are World War I and World War II. War at times may be necessary to defend a country and its allies or to preserve broader peace and security, including by protecting civilians facing a grave humanitarian crisis. Also, we have wars between countries, as well as internal or civil wars within particular countries. However, most countries, if not all, endeavor to exhaust other options before war whenever they can, and carefully weigh the cost and risk of action against the cost and risk of inaction. Summary: propaganda is a deliberate attempt to direct the thinking of the recipient without its conscious collaboration into predetermined channels. It seeks by power of suggestion, which at the proper time becomes instruction to secure positive action. Propaganda has been classified into three categories: black, grey, and white. Military instruments are usually used in the attempt to get a target, a state, or group or groups within a state to change its objectionable behavior through either the threat to use force or the actual use of limited force. There are three major forms of military instruments: military assistance, threat of coercion, and war. War is usually the last resort used by states in furthering their foreign policy. End of lecture 4. Thanks for listening.